Coming May 30th, 2026 to Nashville, Michigan. It's Ghostorama Nashville. Coming to you from the Foxview Event Center in Nashville, located at 975 Main Street. We will have spooky vendors, a car show, food vendors, activities for the little hunters in our lives. This is a look at para-unity at its best. Skeptics, believers, non-believers, debunkers, the general public. It is a deep dive into the supernatural and the paranormal. We will have 3 public speaking engagements at noon, 1 and 2. Vendor spaces are limited indoors at $35 and outdoors unlimited at $25. The show will be followed by an after-hours ghost hunt at one of Nashville's top haunted locations. The price for the after-hours ghost hunt is $30 for the first person in your team and $20 for each additional team member. Come and join us May 30th, 2026 for Ghostorama. Or always wonder what truly hides in the dark. Ghostorama is sponsored by Southern Michigan Paranormal's Frankenfest, Paranormal Papa Investigations, Jesse Joan of Arc, and the Midwest Parahistoric Society.
Welcome back to the Paranormal Papa Podcast episode. We're going to call this episode 28B. Coming to you from Ferocious Feline Studios in Cassopolis, Michigan. Hey kids, it's Papa with Paranormal Papa Investigations and Paranormal Papa Podcast. Welcome back to another podcast episode. I was going to call it episode 29. But after this episode came out on Sunday, we received a lot of questions. Not just in comments, but I received messages on Facebook Messenger. I received emails. And for those that really know me well and have my private information, I received texts, even phone calls. And it really kind of shocked me that everybody was taking such a huge interest in this whole UFO-UAP alien thing. So I dove down the rabbit hole just a little bit deeper. And through a couple days of doing my research and trying to gather more information, I ran across multiple Richard Doty. You remember him from the end of that video from Sunday. Former Air Force Office of Special Investigations officer. UFO recovery, non-Terran biological interaction. And I wanted to touch on this subject some more, but only listening to what Richard had to say about this phenomenon that has made mainstream news, since Obama's, comments on the live stream or on the podcast about, aliens do exist. He's just not met any of them. And then, the president's release just a few hours later about how he released top secret information and he's in trouble and shouldn't have done that, to just the next day when the president came out and said he was going to order the release of all information regarding UFOs, UAPs, and extraterrestrial interaction from all government agencies. What can we expect in that? Of course, my personal feelings on that. We're probably going to get more black ink on white paper, and I'm not talking about words, I'm talking about lines, like these. But I'm not going to waste any more time. We're going to get right into this Richard Doty presentation. And he goes over a lot. I know it's a little long, but believe me, if I would have compiled all of his presentations, it would have been over 4 hours. So sit back, grab some popcorn, grab a soda, and let's listen to what Richard has to say about complete disclosure.
My name is Richard Doty. I'm a former intelligence officer with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. I did a lot of things in my life. During my career as OSI, I was in the Special Projects Branch. And today I'm going to discuss exactly what the Air Force Office of Special Investigations Special Projects Branch does. It was founded in 1948 when the National Security Act created the United States Air Force. Before 1948, the Air Force was a part of the United States Army. It was called the Army Air Force. But there wasn't an investigative unit within the Army Air Force. Back in those days, the Office of Strategic Services did the intelligence operations for the military. The first director of the AFOSI was Joseph Carroll. He was assistant director of the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover. And when the Air Force was created, J. Edgar Hoover loaned Mr. Carroll to the AFOSI. He was given a rank of Brigadier General, and he took over charge of AFOSI. AFOSI has the following branches: the Criminal Investigations Branch, which conducts criminal investigations within the United States Air Force and also other agencies such as the National Security Agency and the Defense Intelligence Agency. Also conduct fraud investigations, computer crime investigations. They also provide protective services. That means they're similar to the United States Secret Service. They protect high-ranking Air Force dignitaries. And within the Counterintelligence Division is the Special Projects Branch, for which I worked. AFOSI Special Project Branch is charged with developing and implementing security policies and procedures for special access programs. We're talking about programs that are so sensitive, are so highly classified, that a lot of people within the Air Force doesn't even know about it. The Special Projects Branch guides and directs security-related activities of all programs involving advanced research and development. That means any advanced research projects that are occurring at Air Force bases throughout the United States, particularly within the Air Force Technical Research Area, such as Groom Lake, or we call Area 51. All the special projects that are occurring out there, the research and development in the new aircraft technologies or new laser technologies are being protected by the Special Project Branch of AFOSI. The Special Project Branch also provides counterintelligence support to Air Force and other governmental agencies' special activities operations. Within the Air Force, we have what we call special tactics. They're the special forces of the Air Force. They're made up of combat controllers. They're modeled first out. They jump in areas, set up drop zones. Special reconnaissance forces, they go in prior to even the Army and recon the area. And also the pararescue people. They require to have tactical intelligence in order to do their mission. The Special Project Branch provides that intelligence to the Special Tactics Command of the United States Air Force. The Special Project Branch also conducts classified investigations and special operation missions to protect vital U.S. Air Force programs and projects. This is where UFOs and UAPs come in. When there's an investigation involving a UFO landing or contact with an extraterrestrial involving Air Force personnel or other military agencies, the investigative part of OSI that does those investigations is the Special Projects Branch. The Special Projects also supports and directs defense intelligence agencies and national security agencies, meaning that they provide the technical support and the intelligence investigative support on special projects within the Defense Intelligence Agency and the national security agencies. That's done by the Special Projects Branch. Let's talk a little about who the Air Force OSI special agents are. They're recruited out of the Air Force, uniformed personnel, or civilians. There's approximately an equal number of military personnel that are agents and personnel that are civilians or government. Their entry level is they have to go through the Federal Law Enforcement Academy at Glencoe, Georgia, and that's an 11-week course. And then OSI agents attend their own academy, which is 12 weeks at Glencoe, Georgia. And after that, they're given specialized training into the different areas that they're going into, such as polygraph examiners. Polygraph examiners go through special training to be certified as lie detector technicians. There's also computer crimes investigators, forensics, special operations and counterintelligence and counterespionage training. This is where I came into play. I was given special training as a counterintelligence officer. In order to receive a certification to special projects within OSI, you have to attend the intelligence operations course, and that's at Belvoir, Virginia. It consists of 16 weeks of pretty demanding training, and not everyone who starts the training graduates from the training. I'll give you a little example of what the training consists of. They actually bury you in a hole to see if you could withstand stress. They don't tell you how long you're going to be down there. Eventually you come out. They only give you one meal, a blanket, your clothes you're wearing, and a little pot to provide relief for yourself. When you come out, they ask you how long you've been there, and you don't know because there's no way of keeping track of time. And I forgot to mention the fact that when you're buried in this hole, there's no light. It's completely dark. Most people can't stand that. They panic and they exit the training. And most all the other training within the Special Projects Branch is classified. I can't go into great details about what that consists of, but it's highly classified. But some of it I can talk about consists of deep cover investigations. How to conduct an investigation without anyone knowing you're doing it, especially the target. The person you're going after, you're conducting an investigation against that person But you don't want them to know that you're conducting that investigation. How do you do that? So they train you how to do that, using covers, different cover names, both mis- and disinformation. You also are trained to conduct investigations that involve unidentified flying objects, which is what AFOSI called it when I was in, or UAP, which is what they call it today, unidentified aerial phenomena. And that can consist of just seeing something in the sky and not knowing what it is, especially pilots during missions, seeing something flying and not knowing exactly what that is, and later on reporting it to their supervisor, and eventually getting it filtered down to the Air Force, OSI, and a special agent, who would then turn it over to the special projects agent, which would be me. There's unique ways of conducting UFO and UAP investigations. It's just not the same as a criminal investigation or even an espionage investigation. There's so many uniquenesses to a UFO and a UAP investigation, such as the secrecy of it. Because what you're investigating could very well be some kind of secret or exotic technology that the Air Force is testing that somebody saw and wasn't supposed to see. We also were trained in conducting investigations that involve disinformation or misinformation. In the manual, you're not going to see the word disinformation. You're going to see the word misinformation. The disinformation is a counterintelligence type of investigation for deception. It's called deception operations in the manual. The misinformation is the information that you provide to a target to disinform it. And finally, conducting investigations into alleged abductions by ETs. These are very, very unique investigations. It takes a lot of training, expertise, and a little psychology to investigate those types of investigations. From 1978 to 1988, AFOSI agents assigned to special projects were given a code. We were called 9Qs. That was only known within the agency. So if an OSI agent said, we need a 9Q at this location, they knew that that's going to be myself, somebody that's trained in investigating these special projects. 9Q agents were briefed into special access programs under Project Aquarius. Project Aquarius, and I'm not releasing anything that's classified anymore, but Project Aquarius was the United States government investigation of UFOs and UFO-related incidents from 1947 to present time. And in some 9Qs actually received additional training which involved deeper understanding of Project Aquarius. And I was one of those agents. The investigation, the official investigations of UFOs within the United States Air Force ended supposedly in 1969 when the Condon Report was written. Before that, there was such a thing as Project Blue Book. Project Blue Book was the investigation of sightings of UFOs by Air Force military personnel or even civilians. There were 112 AFOSI detachments throughout the world from about 1952 on that investigated under Project Blue Book. And remember, before Blue Book, we had Project Sign and Project Grudge, which led to Project Blue Book, which was more of an organized investigation into UFOs, primarily in the United States and Canada. The Condon Report, officially called the Scientific Study of UFOs, was published in December 1968 and thus ended the United States Air Force official investigations of UFOs. Remember, official. Well, it didn't. The United States Air Force secretly continued to investigate UFOs and UAPs activities under various classified programs. And why? Why was this? Why did the Air Force continue? The sightings of UFOs didn't stop in December of 1969 with the Condon Report. People and Air Force pilots, Air Force ground personnel, military ground personnel United States Navy ships continued to encounter UFOs. They had to be investigated. Was there a threat to national security? The Condon report was unclassified. There wasn't any classified portions of the Condon report. But few people knew that part of that Condon report was a secret investigation by the Air Force, which said, we can't stop investigating UFOs because there may be a threat to national security. And so we have to continue to investigate these claims of sightings of aerial objects, ET contacts. The Air Force continued to investigate, as I said earlier, under various classified programs involving AFOSI. From 1947 to 69, the Air Force conducted investigations, as I said, under Project Blue Book. Authentic cases were turned over to AFOSI. Now, a UFO investigator went out to the field and encountered something that was official or something that was unexplained, clearly unexplained, then OSI was brought into it. An example of this was the Lonnie Zamora case near Socorro, New Mexico in 1964. Lonnie Zamora was a police officer with the Socorro Police Department. He was on patrol and he saw an object land in an area southeast of the city of Socorro near a gravel pit. He drove out there to investigate. When he got out there, he saw an object on the ground, oval-shaped object with a signia inside of it. He also saw two people, he thought, outside this object. He couldn't identify. So immediately, he contacted his dispatch and asked for a backup. The backup was Sergeant Sam Garcia from the New Mexico State Police. He went out there to assist Lonnie Zamora. The whole case was probably the most believable case in Project Blue Book history up to that point. And this was in 1964, in May of 1964. Immediately, the Air Force brought special teams in, including AFOSI agents, who started an investigation into that incident. Back in those days, the OSI were given codes during their investigative process. Any investigation with an OSI was given a case file, a number. The first number is the year it was started. The second number was the district that are investigating it. The next three numbers were codes for different types of investigations. And then after that, there was a sequence. And these codes were from 840 to 845. For instance, 840 was a sighting of an actual ET craft in the air. Now I'm saying an actual ET craft. If it was just an investigation started, they didn't code it anything special. But if they determined it was an actual ET craft through the investigative process, they were given a code, and that was 840. These numbers consist of sightings of actual ET crafts on the ground, actual ET crafts in the air, or somehow identifying it through an Air Force contact, such as a pilot, an Air Force pilot. An actual physical contact with an ET craft is 843, and an abduction incident would have been at 845. These are the codes that we used during my time in OSI. The investigation process could involve the following: personal interviews of witnesses. For instance, a person comes in or makes contact with an OSI agent or even a civilian police agency and reports some kind of contact with a possible ET. We would go out and interview the person, witness. Now, I have to say that most of the cases that I was involved with from 1978 to 1988 were easily explainable objects, such as a case out of Stapleton Airport in Denver, the old airport, Stapleton. United Airlines changed the configuration of their landing lights on their planes, on their jets, their passenger planes. People around the airport saw these strange lights flying all over around the airport. They immediately reported seeing UFOs. At that time, Lowry Air Force Base was in existence at Denver. These reports were made to the OSI at Lowry, claiming that there were flying saucers all over the airport area. Well, it was easily explained that what they thought were flying saucers were actually new landing lights configurations on United Airlines planes, which eventually these lighting configurations were on other planes. What we did when we couldn't explain it was we dealt into it. We tried to figure out exactly what it was. Our primary concern was, what if it was a research and development project, a highly classified project, such as the F-117, or before that, the SR-71 reconnaissance plane, or the new version of the U-2 plane, or some other exotic technology that we're testing. They're not all, now, the Air Force didn't only test fly these things around, which we call Area 51, or the Nellis Test and Training Range. They sometimes ventured out into other areas of the United States. People would see them, report it, thinking it's UFOs. We would investigate. If it was, in fact, a research and development project, we might make the people or infer that it might be a UFO, let them think that it was a UFO, in order to keep whatever research and development project was in existence or flying in an area secret. And I was involved in that. We sometimes, if something was an actual case, we might do other investigative work, such as surveillances, consensual, non-consensual. If we thought somebody, American citizen, or primarily an Air Force person, because we were the Air Force Office of Special Investigation, was in contact with somebody we thought was a real alien, we might do surveillance on them. Now, we have consensual surveillance and non-consensual. The consensual is we're telling them, hey, we're going to watch you. We're going to watch your house. We're going to watch your car. We're going to follow you around. Non-consensual, of course, is we're not telling them that we're following them. And then there's such things as court-ordered surveillances. Now, a court-ordered surveillance is under a special court. It's called a FISA court, Federal Intelligence Surveillance Court, where we would submit an affidavit for a search warrant to conduct electronic surveillance, bugging their house, bugging their car. Now, in order to do this, we would really have to have good, reasonable suspicion that this person was in contact with something that we didn't know, or something exotic or strange. And these counterintelligence investigations are highly classified, highly recorded. And sometimes at the end of the investigations, we would tell the target or the person that we were surveilling what we did. And then other times we wouldn't. And we would also use polygraphs or psychological examinations of the person. And these consisted of hypnotic interviews. And one of the things that OSI, and only OSI, developed during the years was a hypnotic polygraph examination. Putting a person under hypnosis and then giving them a polygraph examination. It's pretty difficult to lie when you're under hypnosis. AFOSI may seek advice from other agencies such as the FBI, the CIA, DIA, all these alphabetic agencies. And I always clarify these agencies because a lot of viewers, when I say DIA, they're not sure what that means. So I'm going to explain it. CIA is the Central Intelligence Agency. The Central Intelligence Agency is responsible for providing detailed intelligence to the policymakers of the United States. Their jurisdiction is outside the United States. They have limited jurisdiction within the United States, given to them by the Patriot Act of 2001, only for terrorist-related situations. The Defense Intelligence Agency, or DIA, is worldwide. They have some jurisdiction within the United States. NSA is a national security agency. They're the ones that control the satellites, or they collect signals from all over, either Earth or outside Earth. When we could detect espionage occurring, regardless of what it is, and it could very well be, believe it or not, an American or an Air Force person giving classified information to an ET, that would be considered espionage. And within the United States, the FBI is the primary agency that's responsible for espionage investigations. They may turn them over to OSI if it involves a military person, but primarily it's the FBI. All investigations involving UAPs or UFOs or ET contacts are always coordinated through the Defense Intelligence Agency. They have the clearinghouse of all the information that we collect, we give to them. But most of the special project investigations that we conduct are easily settled without any kind of court action. And a lot of the investigations we do pertaining to UAPs or UFOs or ET contacts are non-criminal investigations. Just because you have a contact doesn't mean you're going to get into any trouble with anyone. Cases involving threats against the United States, we take serious. And we conduct very detailed investigations when there's some type of threat imposed by something that we don't know. We conduct very detailed investigations. We go to the limits, as I discussed earlier, regarding surveillances, getting warrants. We do it all, and we do it all very well. The Aviary, the unofficial UFO working group, was formed in the late 1970s. A small group consisting of U.S. government officials with high security clearances. Everyone within the Aviary were government employees with a security clearance. The object of this group was to coordinate data regarding UFOs, or UAPs they call them now, and ET contacts. Everything that we knew, or everything that we wanted to know regarding UFOs, was filtered through various government agencies back then, primarily the Defense Intelligence Agency. But we were an unofficial working group that was trying to put one foot ahead of the other and keep track of the information that was being collected. And we also wanted to form an alliance with the MJ-12 group, working either alongside them or working with them. The Aviary always met in secure facilities, such as a CIA safe house in Vienna, Virginia, or other facilities around the eastern part of the United States. Most of the meetings were in the east, with the exception of a couple that were in Dayton, Ohio, and one in Vermont. The group was led by the former director of the Central Intelligence Agency, and we'll talk about him later. Let's talk about who they are, who the members of the Aviary were. Blue Jay, code name for Dr. Christopher Green, neurologist and former CIA officer. I worked with Kit Green in Europe for many years. Kit Green was an expert when it comes to ET relationship with medicine. Then we had Siegel, code name for Dr. Bruce McAbee, a PhD research scientist in optical physics and laser weapons for the United States Navy. Pelican. Pelican was Ron Pandolfi. He was a CIA Deputy Director for the Division of Science and Technology. Next one, codename Owl, was Dr. Hal Puthoff, a physicist with the Institute for Advanced Studies at Austin. He was former U.S. Navy physicist. He was known, or best known, for being involved with remote viewing. He worked for the SDI at Stanford in the early 1970s and developed techniques along with other experts in remote viewing. Penguin was a code name for John Alexander, Colonel, United States Army Intelligence. He worked for the Security Command of the United States Army. He retired and then worked for Los Alamos. Hawk was Ernie Keller Strauss, a former employee of the Armed Forces Institute of Technology at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Ernie had intimate knowledge of what occurred at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in the 50s and 60s. Chickadee was Commander C.B. Scott Jones, a PhD, U.S. Navy retired, former officer with the Office of Navy Intelligence, and the former aide to the late Senator Claiborne Pell. Next, we had Condor. Condor, code name for Captain Robert Collins, U.S. Air Force scientist involved in UFO research at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Next on the list was the real Falcon. People always thought that I was the Falcon. I was codenamed the Falcon. Heard that, saw that. Even some people on the internet still talk about Richard Doty as the Falcon. Well, I wasn't Falcon. The former director of the Central Intelligence Agency, Richard Helms, was the Falcon. My code name was Sparrow. Richard Dick Doty, and Dick is what some of the people within the Aviary called me. My father, growing up, would always call me Dick rather than Rich. Then we had Chicken Little. Chicken Little was Dan Smith, a civilian UFO research and volunteer liaison among sources with the CIA. Dan was the only one within the Aviary that didn't have a security clearance at first, but he later obtained one. And there were other frequent guests that we invited, or others invited to our meetings. And these guests included Major Ed Dames, who was a remote viewer, Admiral Bobby Inman, former director of the DIA, or Defense Intelligence Agency, John McCone, former CIA director, William Colby, former CIA director, and employees of science companies or civilian companies, such as Dr. Eric Davis and even Robert Bigelow. These are some of the members that we invited. Now, what's the objectives of the Aviary? Well, to coordinate data, see the big picture, analyze the meaning of UFOs and extraterrestrial contact with Earth, use this knowledge to gain access to additional information on the hyper-secret Majestic 12 working group. Now, did we ever work or have meetings with the MJ-12 working group? No. We coordinated, had liaison with them, but we never actually worked with them. They never attended our meetings. So the names of the members of the MJ-12 group were not officially known to us. But some members of the group, some of the scientists, some of the key officials within our working group, or the Aviary, did know who the members of the MJ-12 group was. Now, the Aviary gave themselves code names, but the story behind that is Robert Collins, one of the members of the group, had a friend and a colleague. I had a friend and a colleague named Bill Moore, although Bill was never a member of the Aviary. Bill Moore had a friend by the name of Jamie Shandera, and they got together one night and knew who we were and named us, giving us those bird names. Why they did that, it was easier to keep track of us. And once we found out who we were as far as the bird names, we actually called ourselves those bird names when we had meetings. We developed policy and procedures for the group. We maintained absolute secrecy. And some of the people within the Aviary had access to the Red Book. Now, what is the Red Book? The Red Book was a human compendium of information derived from the United States government's investigation and collection of data on extraterrestrial contacts from 1947 to present. Why 1947? The Red Book started the historical analysis or the chronological order of the United States government's involvement with UFOs beginning in 1947, or the Roswell case. The Roswell case, as most people know, was a crash of a UFO north of Roswell, actually near Corona, New Mexico. The official investigation by the United States government involved finding 2 crash sites initially in 1947. One near Corona, which contained the actual craft, the oval-shaped craft. The second one a little bit south, which contained a debris field. The debris field was the antenna off the crashed one near Corona. And then in 1949, we found another crash site west of Socorro, New Mexico, in the plains of San Agustin. And that would have been the second craft that crashed in New Mexico. From 1947 to present time, the collection of data was contained in the Red Book. And it was more or less a briefing book for key officials, especially the President of the United States. The Red Book is maintained and strictly controlled by MJ-12. Each Avery had a CIA C card, which gave them access to above top secret information, special access programs dealing with ET contacts, although no Avery member had authorization to conduct field operations except me. I was given the authority because I was an intelligence officer. I was given the authority to investigate things that the Avery needed investigated. And so I was the only one within the Avery that had investigative powers. Does the Avery exist today? Yes, it does. But in a completely different format. It's not connected to the government today or to any intelligence agencies. The Avery today conducts operations to prepare for universal disclosure. All members of current Avery, which calls themselves the Advanced Working Group, which I'm involved, are more open to the public and still coordinate activities with agencies, intelligence agencies, on the outside. Meaning, we don't go to the CIA headquarters or DIA headquarters at Bowling or NSA at Fort Meade or to OSI at Quantico. We are on the outside looking in. We have the ability to coordinate certain things with operatives within the intelligence community. Now, let's talk about disclosure. The hype right now is that at some point, maybe in the near future, we will have disclosure. There's 2 groups out there that I know of. One group led by Lou Elizondo. He's not an Avery member, never had been. He has a group that's trying to push disclosure. My group, which we call the Advanced Working Group, contains intelligence officers, some that are still within the government, and most are outside the government, and some that had been an Avery member before. Our objective is disclosure. We want disclosure just like everyone else wants disclosure. We want the truth about the United States government's involvement with UFOs, or UAPs as it's called now, or ET contacts, made public. Now, is that feasible? Well, I think it is feasible in a way. It's not entirely practical because there's some information that the government wants to be held secret. And there's some information that will always be secret. Anything to do with technologies or anything to do with gathering intelligence, technical intelligence, through sources and methods will remain classified. And I'm for that. I don't want other countries, our nemesis, such as Russia, China, or North Korea, to gather our technology. So that part of the disclosure probably will never happen. But just the fact that we had been visited, we had contacts, and we have information and technology from outside this earth, that should be disclosed. So how do we do that? Well, we have to convince a lot of people within the government that we are the ones, our working group are the ones that need to start the disclosure progress. Now, it actually started when the New York Times article came out in 2017 discussing incidents involving the USS Nimitz and USS Roosevelt, Navy UFO or UAP contacts. And over the years, there's been more information released. Just the fact that the United States government has investigated UFOs and UAPs has been released. The United States Space Force, which is a new branch of the United States military, actually admits it. Yes, we have investigated. We have collected things, signals from outside this world. We actually have photographed objects from outside this world. So our working group, or this former aviary, we're trying to coordinate with U.S. Space Force, with the Department of Defense Inspector General's office, a way to do this. Now, is it going to be easy? Probably not. So far, we've ran across a lot of no's, meaning we ask for something, or we ask for some little disclosure project or a program. We'd write a plan for a program, a project, we present it, and they turn us down. Our backs are up against a wall. We've run into a lot of fences. We have to get over those fences. We have managed to get over a few of the fences. But for the most part, disclosure is going to be short and quick responses until the government opens up everything. And we're trying to do that. And we're trying to get the government to open up on these projects that won't be classified or not classified anymore. I had a conversation with the Department of Defense Inspector General's office, a telephone conversation. I learned a lot from them. They learned a lot from me. In fact, during one particular telephone conversation, they talked to me about an incident that happened back in the 80s when they were cryptically trying to explain this case to me. I immediately realized that was one of my cases. And I told the person on the phone, I said, that's my case. He said, yeah, your name's on here. I said, well, then you know what it's about. He said, no, I don't. I said, well, just read it. He said, I can't, so I'll redact it. I had a big laugh over that. I said, wait a minute, you're the government, you're the Department of Defense Inspector General's office, and you can't get a report, a clear report from another agency that's not redacted? And his response was, yes, we're having problems getting information from other agencies. That's key right there to tell or show the American people that government agencies are not cooperating on disclosure. If you can't get, even if you have access to special programs, which this particular report would have required, I knew what the report was. Once he told me the file number, once he told me the time frame, I knew exactly what it was. And here I am on the phone, and I can't discuss classified information on the phone, and he can't receive classified information on the phone. I'm in New Mexico. He's in Washington, D.C. And so I said, well, I would have to sit down in person and explain to you this investigation. But I thought, isn't it odd that he can't get a clear report? But that clues you into what's wrong with the disclosure projects. Governments, agencies are not cooperating. The National Security Agency's not cooperating with the Central Intelligence Agency. The CIA is not cooperating with the DOD. DOD is not cooperating with the Army, so forth and so on and so on. And there's agencies within the government, particularly the United States Air Force, that don't want disclosure. The United States Space Command or Space Force wants disclosure, but they want to do it their way. So this is a problem that they have within the United States government, and we have outside a civilian working group trying to get disclosure to the public. So I hope this allows the viewers to understand the complexity of disclosure, how we as a civilian working group, the Aviary and now the Advanced Working Group, are working to try to get disclosure to the public. From the very early era of the UFO dilemma, mysterious people have surfaced. Some were pioneers of the UFO early days. Names such as Kenneth Arnold, Donald Keyhole, George Adamski, to name just a few. All these people were pioneers starting the interest of UFOs, the mystique of the UFO phenomena. But these people, such as George Adamski, who claimed to have had contact with a person from Venus, he wrote 3 books, talked about his exploits within the UFO phenomena. He created some phenomena himself within his books. Or people like Donald Keyhole, who was one of the key members of Project Blue Book. There's other people that have led and continued the UFO phenomena. A person such as Art Bell. Art Bell, a good friend of mine, had a fantastic radio program. He was involved Coast to Coast, and then he went on later in his own radio program out of his house at Pahrump, Nevada. Art interviewed some sensational people over the years, some mysterious people, talking about mysterious things that occurred in the deserts, different desert areas of Nevada. And then there's George Norrie, who's the current host, George Knapp. George Knapp is another one that's really has moved the UFO interests through his television contacts and television programming in Nevada. And then there's Whitley Strieber. Whitley has written some books about it and has spoken about it and has really moved on the interests of UFO and especially the psychological portions of some of the UFO dilemma. The first person I want to talk about is Jamie Shandera. Who is Jamie Shandera? How does he fit into the UFO dilemma? Shandera surfaced first in 1981 as a friend of Bill Moore's. Jamie was in the film industry. Jamie had contact with the Office of Naval Intelligence because he did some photographic work for the Office of Naval Intelligence. He had a contract, a small contract, to do some filming for ONI, abbreviation for Office of Naval Intelligence, in the 1970s. ONI used Shandera on a classified mission once. But Jamie really didn't know what that classified mission was. He was told to do some things, take some photographs, which he did. But during that mission, Shandera claimed to have contact with an extraterrestrial being near Coronado Island, which is in San Diego. The ET lived in a house on the island and appeared human, according to Shandera. The ET had extraordinary powers. The ET could float rather than walk and could defy gravity. Wow, that's really perked the interest of not only the Office of Naval Intelligence, but other people that Jamie had contact with. Shandera utilized some of his contacts within the film industry to obtain cameras, or special cameras, so he could use to spy in this house. When the ONI found out about what he was doing, they ceased all contact with Jamie. But in the meantime, the ONI, with assistance of other federal agencies, actually put their own surveillance on this house in Coronado Island. But when they moved in to search the house, they found the ET had vanished. The ET house was thoroughly searched, but nothing connecting the ET to any known types of extraterrestrial powers were found. Jamie was detained and interrogated, but never charged with an offense. In 1980, Shandera was again detained by the Navy security personnel when he strayed into a U.S. Navy SEAL training area on Coronado Island. According to Shandera, the ET asked Jamie to go there and wait for a craft to land. No craft landed, and he was eventually charged with trespassing onto a military installation by the San Diego County Sheriff's Department. And eventually, the federal government charged him in federal court, or in U.S. Magistrate Court, with trespassing. ONI went in and asked the U.S. Magistrate to dismiss the charges against Jamie. Now, why would they do that? Jamie was secretly working for ONI again, and we found this out with a working group and strayed into that matter and obtained some information about Jamie Shandera. So that's who Jamie Shandera was, and that's how he was connected to the UFO phenomenon. Let's talk about William Moore. William Moore, as most people know, was a co-author of 2 top-selling books. The original Roswell incident. He wrote the book, was co-author of the book, and he also wrote The Philadelphia Experiment, about a ship that allegedly disappeared during training in 1942. Moore was a school teacher and a union organizer who left the classroom and became a full-time UFO investigator. Moore was involved with MUFON and other UFO working groups. Moore was known to U.S. intelligence, specifically me, because he had contacts with Soviet citizens inside the Soviet Union. Now, that's key to us because we had a way or a method to transmit or communicate with people inside the Soviet Union back in the 80s. And we used Moore for that. So Moore was famously known within the intelligence community for being a pretty good spy, a pretty good contact, or an asset that allowed us to communicate through him to people within the Soviet Union. I recruited Bill Moore. I recruited him to be a spy within the UFO community. That's pretty well known now. In 1989, during a convention, Bill Moore told his story, released that information, upset a lot of people within MUFON and the former APRO because he was spying on them. And why did we want somebody, why did U.S. intelligence want somebody within the UFO community? Well, we wanted to know what was going on within the UFO community. Sometimes people reported things to them that they didn't report to the government. And so we kept track of the information that MUFON was collecting regarding UFOs, ET contacts, abductions, and other things. And that's why we utilized Bill Moore. Now, Bill was also involved in the Paul Benowitz case. U.S. intelligence asked Moore to contact Benowitz and seek information on his activities. Now, just to refresh everyone's memories, Paul Benowitz was a scientist who worked outside had an office outside Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He also lived right outside the base perimeter. He was photographing strange things that are occurring on the base. We began an investigation. It was my investigation, and Bill Moore assisted us in the investigation. Bill Moore had already had contact with Paul Benowitz because, believe it or not, Paul Benowitz was a member of MUFON. In fact, he was state director of MUFON in New Mexico. So Bill Moore had contacts with Paul Benowitz, and we're friends. Bill Moore provided valuable information regarding Paul Benowitz, his secrets, some of the things that Paul was doing that he didn't let the government know he was doing. He also performed some highly classified operations for U.S. intelligence, which, believe it or not, are still classified today. So Bill Moore was a key person within the intelligence community. He did some amazing things to provide information to us that didn't involve anything to do with UFOs or ETs. There's another guy by the name, and probably some of you, or maybe most of you, watching this presentation, probably never heard of. But this person is Joseph Yeager. Yeager was a retired U.S. intelligence agency employee. Yeager had worked for the intelligence community for over 25 years. Yeager was one of the original behind-the-camera persons at the 1988 UFO Cover-Up live show. Now, a lot of you remember that. You can go back and even YouTube it. It's still on the internet. There's a program that was live in Hollywood. They had a lot of people on the show. I was supposed to be on the show hidden behind a camera, but I was not. I wasn't there. It wasn't me. But Joseph Yeager was there, and he was one of the ones behind the cameras. In 2005, Yeager initiated the Serpo email exchange with Victor Martinez. Now, I just unloaded a lot of information to the viewers out there about who actually started the Serpo story. And that was Joseph Yeager. Now, unfortunately, Yeager passed away a few years ago, but Yeager showed documents which were marked classified, which related to the Serpo story. The documents detailed the entire story of Project Crystal Night, or the exchange program involving 12 members of the United States Astronaut Corps on their mysterious journey to the planet Serpo. Whether you want to believe it or not, there's so many different parts of this story, the Serpo story, which, if you listen, we'll discuss in another episode. But Yeager provided details on every aspect of the Serpo story, including airing a film from the 1950s that showed EBA, extraterrestrial biological entity that was found alive at the Roswell crash site, and the communications device that EBA got out of the craft. Yeager presented a highly classified briefing to people like Wendell Stevens, Robert Dean, Stan Friedman, Gene Laskowski, Tom Mack, Carl Dale, and even myself. And he would defy anyone that wanted to argue with him about what he knew. Another person that's some people will know the name, and probably some won't, is Gene Laskowski. He also goes by Gene Lakes. Laskowski was a former U.S. intelligence agency employee for over 30 years, meaning he was a real spy, on the ground, boots on the ground, kicking you-know-what in foreign countries, collecting intelligence. After his retirement, he worked as chief security at, guess where? Area 51, which is, of course, inside the Nellis Test and Training Range. Laskowski gave a highly controversial presentation at a 1999 UFO convention to a select few about the immediate danger of ET activities on Earth. Presented evidence that ETs are working among us today. Laskowski is about 96 years old and still alive. He's still online. You can still see his emails. a number of different sites. But ironically, Laskowski, he agreed in some of the Serpil story, but he disagreed on all of it. So what's the truth about Serpil and what's fiction? We'll talk about that later. Another highly controversial person within the UFO community, most good insiders, people with good access to the inside, will know the name Paul McGovern. McGovern was the chief of security operations at Area 51 after Laskowski. McGovern had complete knowledge of all UFO and ET activities at the test site, Area 51. McGovern was briefed into research and development operations on both Area 51 and Tonopah Air Force Base. Now remember, Tonopah is just connected next to Area 51. Now Paul McGovern talks a different story about the Serpil mystery. He agrees to some, disagrees with some of the other information. That presents a problem with people within the UFO community trying to understand the Serpil story and trying to connect the dots to determine whether it's a real incident. Did we really send 12 astronauts to the planet Serpil in an ET craft? Or was that just a project that the government created for disinformation? Disinformation against who? The Soviet Union. Remember, now this is back in the 60s. If we were to present information out there that we had contact with extraterrestrials and floated that information to the Soviets, wouldn't you think the Soviets would be scared that the aliens would be giving us advanced technology, advanced crafts, advanced weapon systems that we could eventually use against the Soviet Union? Could be a disinformation campaign. Maybe that's what Serpil was. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Notable mentions within the classification of mystery people within the UFO community. Carl Dale. Carl Dale, retired U.S. Air Force intelligence officer. Now, Carl has a number of stories about what he did as a U.S. intelligence officer within the Air Force. He was an officer. I think he gained the rank of major. He was on some highly classified missions outside the country, investigating UFO activities and crash sites. Robert Collins, retired U.S. Air Force captain. Mark Filburn, retired DIA employee. And Tom Mack. These people contributed to the UFO dilemma in several different ways. Each had their own agenda on the real subject and exactly what that entailed. Now, people like Tom Mack and Mark Filburn, I think some people know Mark. He was on the internet claiming to have worked out at Area 51 on some classified projects for a U.S. contractor. He did. It was verified that Mark worked out there. And he did work for that particular government contractor, EG&G. And he did have access to some really classified information. Tom Mack worked at Area 51. He was he was an operations officer, a civilian operations officer, and he managed the test ranges. There were a number of test ranges around Area 51 where the government tested exotic technology, ET crafts, lasers, and other things. And Tom Mack was in charge of managing those operations. So Tom worked out there. We know he worked out there. It was verified that he worked out there. Unfortunately, Tom Mack passed away a few years ago, but his legend remains within the UFO community, within the government. He was highly respected. George Knapp knew him, spoke to him many times. Art Bell had him on his show as a mystery guest never disclosing his name. I think he was on Art's show 3 different times, where he talked about Area 51 and what was going on inside Area 51. Finally, I have to mention the one person who has kept private from public view all these years. He was a real Falcon. The person that initiated the Avery Working Group, his name was Richard Helms. Helms was an original spy, starting out with the Office of Strategic Services back in World War II. During World War II, he did some extraordinary things for the United States. When the CIA was formed in 1947 after the National Security Act was enacted into law, Helms joined the CIA, worked his way up from an intelligence officer, ground level, to the director of the Central Intelligence Agency from 1966 to 1973. Now, how did Richard Helms become involved with UFOs? He had his own story about a UFO incident that happened in the 1950s at a foreign location. And he became immediately interested in the subject of UFOs, as he had with other aspects of the UFO or the ET phenomenon. He passed away in 2002. He told stories about reading classified cables from CIA stations in Europe, where two CIA case officers on a clandestine mission were where a UFO appeared and disrupted the operation. After he left the agency, he continued to look in and have contact. And that's one reason he formed the Aviary in 1980. He still wanted to be involved in the program. And he was the motivating factor for all people within the Aviary. Rendlesham Forest incident, or British Roswell, that occurred in December of 1980. The incident is probably one of the most remarkable UFO incidents on record. In some respects, this incident is more intriguing than the Roswell incident. Rendlesham Forest was next to 2 military bases, RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge, both U.S. Air Force aircrafts stationed on the base. Bentwaters contained nuclear weapons. So this is an intriguing incident. More information and more actual witnesses were present on the Rendlesham Forest incident than Roswell. The witnesses were United States Air Force security police, who are trained observers. A U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel was a key witness. So this is more authentic and actually more evidence pointing to some sort of ET relationship. Let's start with the background. The incident spanned 3 days in December 1980 in Rendlesham Forest near 2 Air Force bases, as I mentioned before. On December 26th, military police observed lights descending into the forest approximately 1 mile from the east gate of Woodbridge. Now, these gates were manned by Air Force security police personnel. During their next 3 days, several other military police and the system-based commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Hall, encountered a strange UFO present in the forest. Military personnel took radiation readings and voice recorded the incident. Now, what's important is Bentwaters and Woodbridge were U.S. Air Force bases, but controlled by the British government. And that was the agreement that in order to have an Air Force base on British soil, the actual control of the base was by the British government. That's why it was called Royal Air Force Base. Now, these nuclear weapons were secretive because they were on British soil. A lot of protests occurred back in those days regarding nuclear weapons on British soil. But the prime agency that actually conducted a detailed investigation was the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. In 1984, I had access to the Air Force OSI investigation of the incident. I read the case file. I was in Washington, D.C., conducting other business, and Colonel Richard Law, who was the director of counterintelligence for the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, asked me to read the case. Now, the reason I read this case, because in 1980, at Kirtland Air Force Base, we had another incident that happened, which I'll talk about later. But it mirrored, in some respects, to the Rendlesham Forest incident. So that's why Colonel Law wanted me to read this. The case was classified top secret with code words. The case file number was 80 Headquarters D 93-40. The strange part about the case number was that Air Force OSI District Headquarters in the UK was District 62. So it should have been 8062D. But this means something, and it's going to come into play in a little bit. Headquarters generated the case, and they generated the case at the request of the Inspector General of the United States Air Force. Now that's interesting in itself. On the outside, it wouldn't mean anything to anyone, but within the government, it meant that some information must have filtered through District 62 headquarters in Great Britain to get to the Air Force headquarters in order for Air Force headquarters or the Inspector General of the Air Force to request an OSI investigations. Normally, when an OSI agent opens a case, it is requested by the local base commander. The local base commander, either Bentwaters and Woodbridge, didn't want an OSI investigation. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. So, within a chain of command, the OSI worked for the Inspector General's office. But ironically, the Inspector General couldn't order an investigation. It had to come from the Secretary of the Air Force. So the Secretary of the Air Force, who at that time was Hans Mark, requested a OSI investigation of the incident at Bentwaters, Woodbridge. In all my years as an OSI agent, I never saw an investigation requested by the Secretary of the Air Force. Neither did Colonel Law, who had been an OSI agent long before me. The report was authored by Special Agent Bill Cunningham, a veteran OSI agent within the counterintelligence unit at OSI UK. The case file was thick and extremely detailed that I read. The case file detailed interviews of 50 people. Several of the witnesses were interviewed numerous times. Several interviews involved hypnotic transgression sessions, meaning the witness was placed in a hypnotic situation and an interview. Reports from British Ministry of Defense investigators, local police, and classified attachments from the CIA, the NSA, and the DIA. Now remember that. The CIA was interested in this case, as was the National Security Agency, and also the Defense Intelligence Agency. OSI agents obtained air traffic control tapes from the local air traffic controllers on both Bentwaters and Woodbridge, satellite images from the NSA, and detailed maps from the local forest managers. Now, I've read stories in interviews with people who claim that what the soldiers, the airmen, were seeing in the forest was coming from the lighthouse. So OSI decided to check that out. They investigated point-to-point trajectory analysis of the light from the White House to what was seen in the forest, and determined that the lighthouse was too far away, and the light from the lighthouse didn't actually penetrate that forest in Rendlesham. Now, another theory was that the operator of the lighthouse had stopped the rotating light and then directed the light into the forest. That wasn't possible. One annex pertained to the OSI forensics team from Lakenheath, which was another base in the UK, that arrived in January 1981, about a week after the incident. They conducted detailed analysis of the site, the soil, the tree bark, the plants, and even the animals in the area. With the assistance of the forest managers, they trapped a number of rabbits that lived in that forest. The forensic team found high levels of radiation, alpha radiation, that's a particular type of radiation, particle radiation, in the landing area. The forest managers showed OSI agents several plants that had been damaged in some way. They were originally healthy plants, but somehow they were damaged. OSI agents found several strange markings on the trees. Later analysis of the tree bark and plants by the U.S. Department of Agriculture's laboratory revealed that the tree bark and the plants had been mutated by some type of energy. Now, what could have caused plants in an area where a UFO allegedly landed and ETs were seen? Well, some type of energy or some type of rays or radiation damaged these plants. We don't know what it was, but we know that the plants were mutated. The molecular structure of these plants had changed. So for the people out there who thought this was a hoax would have to think differently now that the evidence was presented in such a way that showed that this incident involved something beyond our understanding. The soil suffered the same fate, had been burnt, which would have been done by intense amount of energy or heat. So the soil, you could add, the rocks, the small rocks, the pebbles and the dirt were burnt. A high amount of energy or some heat, intense heat, would have caused that. OSI agents identified a witness in the town of Ipswich who had photographed an object in the sky on the evening of December 26th. OSI agents interviewed the man without MOD present. The man showed 5 photographs taken. Now, these are controversial photographs, as some of the people that are really involved in the Rendlesham Forest have investigated. The man showed the 5 photographs to the OSI agents. The photographs showed a triangle-shaped object with numerous lights flying at a low altitude over the forest. The man refused to provide the photographs to OSI. But with the assistance of British MI5, the photographs were obtained and sent to OSI headquarters for analysis. Now, I know what you viewers are probably thinking, that MI5, which is an investigative arm of the British government, probably broke into the house and took him covertly or clandestinely. I don't know. The report never mentioned how the photographs were obtained, just that with the assistance of the British MI5, OSI got the photographs. I know the OSI didn't go in and get them. During the investigation, the wing commander refused to cooperate with OSI. This is another part of the investigation that is really confusing. Now, the wing commander is over the base commander, remember that. The wing commander tried twice to interfere in the investigation by refusing to provide classified information to OSI and refused to provide the names of all the witnesses to OSI. Well, there's ways that we as OSI agents got around that. And what we did, the OSI, obtained an order from the Secretary of the Air Force to seize all the documents for the wing commander that pertained to the OSI, pertained to the case. Now, the wing commander was eventually relieved of his duty, and the assistant commander did cooperate with OSI. Now, I'm leaving a lot unanswered as far as why did why would the wing commander not cooperate with OSI? There was parts of this investigation, the Rendlesham Forest incident, that confused a lot of people. And it disrupted the operations of both Woodbridge and Bentwaters. Not just during the time period that this has occurred between December 26th and December 30th, but also for months and months afterwards. In fact, the investigation, OSI's investigation, didn't end until 1983. 3 years. But during the time that 20 to 30 OSI agents were interviewing everyone that they could on Bentwaters and Woodbridge, it upset the wing commander. He thought he was in charge. He found out maybe he was in charge of the base, but not the investigations, and he couldn't interfere. So anyways, that's what happened. In the final report, the incident was classified as possible sighting of actual extraterrestrial aircraft and extraterrestrial occupants. That is a notation in the report. That was actually in the report, written in the report. Now, there were hundreds of pages in this report. The report was classified. Now, some, as you know, some people out there know that the parts of the report have been released by the Air Force. But even what was released is heavily redacted. I think only 30 pages have been released. And of those 30 pages, probably 60 to 70% is redacted. So the whole report is like 300 pages. What is contained in those pages that won't ever be released? The conclusion, how the Air Force concluded, or how Air Force OSI concluded what happened at Rendlesham Forest. What happened there? They concluded possible sightings of actual extraterrestrial aircraft and extraterrestrial occupants. Actual human contact with extra beings. That was the conclusion. Remember, signal intelligence information was gathered. Air traffic control tapes were gathered. So they put all these pieces together to form a conclusion. Having done these type of investigations myself in the past, it was difficult to do. When you're dealing with hundreds and hundreds of bits of information, putting it all together and then drawing a conclusion. And that conclusion was something happened at Rendlesham Forest and involved ETs, involved ET craft and ET contacts. That's amazing. That's something that is extraordinary. And as I said earlier in this presentation, this incident, the Rendlesham Forest incident, is probably more documented than the Roswell incident. So the conclusion racked a lot of minds in Washington, D.C., and even within the diplomatic community. Because one of the things that were done after the investigation was over was the ambassador to the United Kingdom, the U.S. ambassador, was given the conclusion and given a summary of the conclusions and was able to brief the British government. Now, I was never told exactly who he briefed, who the ambassador, U.S. ambassador 1983 briefed, but I'm sure it was the Prime Minister and other members of the British Parliament. This was an extraordinary case that brought in so many different facets of the UFO phenomena. A sighting of a craft, a landing of a craft, seeing lights, unexplainable lights, hearing unexplainable voices, as one particular military policeman reported. Recording the event, Lieutenant Colonel Hall was there and he recorded it on a tape recorder. Everything that he was doing was being recorded. Everything he's saying was being recorded. He was explaining what he was doing. All this was put together to form a conclusion. The best observers are people who are trained. Military policemen are trained observers. So this was the most documented case in UFO history, which drew a conclusion that an actual UFO incident occurred in Randlesham Forest in December of 1980.
Welcome back to the studio. You know, it's like I was saying at the beginning. If I would have compiled and put together all of the presentations that Richard has done, that he has disclosed to the American people, it would be over 4 hours long. This is a lot of information. And frankly, it's stuff that a lot of us have thought to be true over the decades, over the years. You know, for decades, the government sat and argued the fact that there was no Roswell incident. It was a hot air balloon or a weather balloon. And to have somebody who actually has seen the files to come out. I always say, if you want the truth, then you go directly to where you can get the truth. Now, granted, there's been stories out there of people who have come forward and disclosed top secret information and have mysteriously met with what's the proper word to say? Unfortunate incidents, or, you know, people who have come forward and been threatened. Richard's not afraid. He said many times he don't care what people think of him. He wants the truth out there the same as all of us do. And I commend him for that. I'd love to sit and talk to this guy one-on-one. He is a compendium of amazing information about his time with the Air Force Office of Special Investigation. Not just his own experiences, but the things, the files that he's been privy to and has seen. But that concludes this episode of the Paranormal Papa Podcast, episode 28B. Only going to get better from here. Wow. But until next time, you take care of yourselves, take care of each other. God bless you, God love you, we do. Happy hunting.